Hey Angels and Biscuits, CSDL here, and today's video is going to be my September and October wrap-up. I decided to combine the two because I started spooky season books in September, plus I just didn't read all that many books, so I thought I would just wait and combine the two wrap-ups, and here we are. So, to keep with the spooky season theme, I am dressed in my ghost face costume from the movie Scream. It is my favorite, more classic horror film, and it's very comfy for a Halloween costume. And I don't know, I was lazy and didn't want to be fancy. So, also, here we be. On to the books themselves. So the first book I read for September was Clockwork Prince by Cassandra Clare. It is book 2 in the Infernal Devices trilogy. So this book I won't go into too much detail on because it is a Shadowhunters novel, so I will have a dedicated reading vlog for it, which will be up eventually. But yeah, so we're still following Tessa, Will, and Jem. Tessa is still figuring out, what she is exactly, and they're also, Tessa, Will, and Jem, plus the Shadowhunters of the London Institute, are still working on the whole mystery with Mortman and the clockwork creatures. And we get a little more depth from characters like Will and Jem. We see a different side of Will, and Jem, we delve a little bit more into his illness. So, overall, I'm still really enjoying the series. I like that it's not so doom and gloom and, completely world-ending plot, like the Mortal Instruments, for example. We get to see a different set of characters. I'm liking a lot of the new characters that were introduced in this book. So, like I said, overall, I'm still really enjoying this series, and I can see why these characters are some of, the fans' favorites. For me, personally, the Mortal Instruments characters are still my favorites, but that's because I also love the Shadowhunters TV series, so I am a little bit more biased towards them. But if you would like to know my full thoughts on this book, be sure to check out my dedicated reading vlog for Clockwork Prince when that comes up, and I will do my best to link that video in the description when it is up and available. The second book I read for September, and the official first book of my spooky season TBR, was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Other Stories by Robert Louis Stevenson. I only read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I did not read the other stories, but I will get around to them eventually. This is a classic, and I thought I wanted to start my spooky season off with a classic, and this is one I haven't read yet. I mean, I've heard the story. It's been parodied over and over again in many TV shows, so I wasn't unfamiliar with it, but I had never actually read the original story. So, for a classic, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. I liked the writing style, I liked the pacing. The language isn't overly flowery. There's a good balance of showing versus telling in the way it's written, and the characters are, I thought, well done. It's definitely a classic I would recommend everyone checks out. I think it's a good starter classic if you want to start reading classics but you don't really want to jump into a really, really big one, like, say, The Count of Monte Cristo, or Dante, the Iliad, the Odyssey, just chunkier classics. This is a good starting point. Also, it's not very hard to read. The language isn't overly complicated. Say, if you wanted to go John Milton and read the epic poem Paradise Lost, or say Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, it's just the language is a little more complicated and hard to follow. Or even the Count of Monte Cristo, it's just so much descriptive language. It really is a struggle to like maintain your attention, and there's just so much to keep track of and pay attention to. Where Jekyll and Hyde's a lot shorter. Like, it's the book itself might look a little bit bigger, but the story itself's only like this big. It's very, very short. So, like, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, it's another shorter classic that I think is a good way to start your classics journey. And it's an interesting story. It's, if you like mysteries, if you like, the spooky vibes, it's a good place to start. So the story itself is pretty interesting. Like, I was actually really invested in it, like the themes behind it. Essentially, it's getting at that all humans are made out of good and evil. And in the story, Dr. Jekyll obviously tries to separate the evil part of himself. Like, he wants to get rid of it. He wants to be pure good. But humans are flawed individuals. Like, it's not going to happen. And he tries anyway to separate the evil part of himself. And what he ends up doing is not separating the evil, but giving the evil part of himself more of a persona, more personality, like more control over his body, and it even changes the physical appearance of his body. It makes him look not right. People look at him, and while he doesn't actually have any disfigurement, that's kind of the impression people get when they look at him because of the evil. And it's just, like an interesting concept to explore, that rather than just trying to be a better person in his life, he wanted like the easy way out, I guess. He wanted to just physically remove the evil part of himself, or the parts of him that weren't pure and that weren't good. But it turned out, oh, that's not possible, and you just ended up giving the evil part of yourself more control over your mind and your body. It's fascinating, and I liked the way that this author did that, and I thought it was really well done. It's a very good classic. It's definitely up there on my list of classics. I still think I like The Picture of Dorian Gray more, but this one is pretty good. I would definitely recommend checking out Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or some of the other stories. There's lots of stories here to read. He's done other books too. But yeah, definitely a classic worth checking out. That brings us to October's books, and we're going to start with Carrie by Stephen King. Now, I think I've read Carrie many, many years ago, and I've seen the first movie that was made about it, not the remake, but like the original, and it was always one of the better films, in my opinion. Like, Stephen King's books have not been adapted well to film, in my opinion, generally speaking, but I didn't think Carrie was that bad. And like many of King's books, the theme is something that is kind of a real world relatable issue, in this case like bullying, but there's supernatural elements thrown in there. With Carrie, it was her telekinesis, and in this book, like, the supernatural elements are treated like not supernaturally. Like, the doctors and the scientists, they all come at it from like this scientific perspective, like they can analyze it and understand it that way. Not necessarily from a supernatural perspective, like magic or whatever. Like, they're not looking at it as magical or something. They're looking at it more as a genetic thing. And while I love a good, like, deep supernatural lore, supernatural everything kind of story, sometimes I kind of like the subtlety of it, how they're coming at it like, oh, this is a genetic problem. We can totally try to analyze this with science, even if they can't. because often, instead of using science or genetics, it's a supernatural problem, and they go to supernatural experts, and it's magical, not scientific. And of course, I love books done this way. Most of my favorite books are pure supernatural. Like, they don't even try to blend it with, real world science or anything like that. They just go right into it's all magic. Here are the magic rules, this and that. But I like the subtlety here, and I think this Carrie's story is fairly relatable outside of, her having telekinetic powers. She was a teenage girl who was bullied, and just like bullying in general, a lot of kids have experienced that. So she's a relatable character. And King, I think, built up to her like telekinetic breakdown very well. Like, we saw the progression, we saw all of Carrie's trauma and all the betrayal and bullying that led up to it, both at home and at school. And I thought it was really well done. It's a theme that's relatable, for one, and two, the character is set up very well. I'm a fan of King's writing, at least his older stuff. I haven't read anything new by King, so I can't say I enjoy his current works, but his, more classic stories I have definitely enjoyed. Carrie is definitely one I enjoy. And if you're looking to check out Stephen King's work, I would definitely recommend starting with Carrie. It's shorter for one of his books. It's one of his earlier works. I think it's just overall, a good place to start. And the story isn't super complicated. I think Carrie is also a relatable character. There's a lot of things that I really liked about this book. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's still enjoyable, and definitely worth checking out if you're interested in trying some Stephen King. So, the last book that I read for spooky season was Blood and Chocolate by Annette Curtis Klaus. This is, I guess, the more traditional spooky supernatural type of book. It's about werewolves. This is also the book that I think surprised me the most out of all the books that I read. I thought the ending was going to go very differently, like it ended totally like the opposite of how I thought it would. Big surprise for me, but I did really enjoy it, and I actually think I kind of like the way it ended compared to like how I was expecting it to. So the story itself is kind of about a werewolf girl who doesn't really want to be involved with her werewolf pack. Like, she doesn't like how she's treated, how they treat her and female werewolves in general. Basically, her pack wants something for her that she doesn't want. She wants to be more normal. She wants to try living a more human life, and she gets a human boyfriend, and there's drama ensues because of that. Plus, there's some pack problems going on. Her father was the alpha, some things happened, he died, and now they need a new alpha, so they have to, do their werewolf traditions and get a new alpha, and then with the new alpha comes the alpha's like mate or whatever, which inadvertently became our main character, Vivian. But she, like I said, she's bent on trying to have this human life. The story is basically her struggle between um, being a werewolf and what all that means and wanting something different. I thought this was a really well done werewolf book. Like, it made me want to go find more werewolf books and read them. Like a lot of werewolf books, there are some more adult themes going on, so be aware of that if you do want to check out Blood and Chocolate. But I found it to be an enjoyable werewolf, enjoyable supernatural story. And if you like werewolves, if you like werewolf stories, and you're pretty familiar with certain dynamics and certain tropes and things that they include in werewolf stories, I would totally give it a try or check it out. And that was my wrap up for September and October. Let me know what you guys read in the comments, and I would totally appreciate it if you left a like, a comment, or subscribed, and I will see you guys next time.